You are standing in the shadows of Greenwich Palace on a sweltering July morning in 1588 AD. The air hangs thick with the mingled scents of unwashed bodies, rotting rushes on the floor, and the sickly sweet perfume that courtiers douse themselves with to mask what lies beneath. Through the heavy wooden doors, you hear the rustle of silk and the soft murmur of voices as Queen Elizabeth I holds court. But as you draw closer, another smell cuts through the floral mask. Something sharp and metallic, like copper pennies left in stagnant water, mixed with the earthy musk of bodies that have known soap only as a stranger. The Virgin Queen, Gloriana herself, sits resplendent on her throne in cloth of gold and pearls, her pale face painted white as fresh snow. She smiles, revealing teeth the color of autumn leaves. And when she speaks, courtiers lean forward, not just in reverence, but because the distance makes her words easier to bear. This is the woman who defeated the Spanish Armada, who ruled England for 45 years with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. But beneath the magnificent facade lay habits that would make a modern person recoil in horror. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to Historical Mysteries for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by their shared curiosity about the past. Share your commitment with the phrase "I practice inner strength" in the comments, and let's embark on this mysterious historical journey to reconnect with our own truth. Ready? Let's begin. The truth about Elizabeth Tudor's personal hygiene reads like a catalog of medieval nightmares, each habit more revolting than the last. Yet to understand why England's greatest queen lived this way, we must first understand the world she inhabited, a world where bathing was considered dangerous, where medicine was guesswork, and where even royalty lived in conditions that would horrify us today. The quarterly bath ritual. Elizabeth I was actually progressive by the standards of her time. She bathed once every 3 months, whether she needed it or not. Her exact words, recorded by her courtiers, were that she bathed once every 3 months, whether I needed it or not. Most of her subjects went months or even years without a full bath, believing that water opened the pores and made the body vulnerable to disease and evil spirits. When Elizabeth did bathe, it was a production worthy of a theatrical performance. Servants would haul enormous copper tubs into her private chambers, filling them with water heated over massive kitchen fires. The water came from the Thames, already polluted with the waste of London's growing population. The river water was brown and thick with sewage, dead animals, and industrial runoff from the city's workshops and tanneries. Soap. The soap available was a crude mixture of animal fat, wood ash, and lye that was more likely to strip skin than cleanse it. The fat came from pigs and cattle, often already rancid. The ash was gathered from palace fireplaces, carrying soot and residue. When mixed with lye, this concoction created a soap harsh enough to remove skin along with dirt. But 90 days is a long time between baths. As weeks passed, Elizabeth's body would accumulate layers of sweat, dead skin, and various substances she applied to mask her odor. By the end of her 3-month cycle, courtiers would know when the queen was approaching long before she entered a room. Court documents from 1579 AD record a telling incident. The French ambassador complained in a letter to his king that he had to hold a pomander filled with sweet herbs to his nose during his audience with the queen. For the royal person, amid such odor as to make close conversation a trial of endurance. The ambassador's wife fainted during a formal dinner, not from heat as publicly announced, but from the overwhelming smell emanating from the royal table. Dental disaster. Elizabeth's teeth were perhaps her most infamous hygiene disaster, becoming a subject of international gossip and diplomatic concern. By her 40s, they had turned completely black from decay, and the sight of her smile became so disturbing that foreign ambassadors would write detailed reports about it to their home countries. The Queen's dental problems began with her insatiable appetite for sugar. In the 16th century, sugar cost more than gold, making it a status symbol. Elizabeth's daily diet included marchpane, sugared violets, candied fruits, comfits, and sweet wines. She would nibble on sugar throughout the day, letting crystals dissolve slowly in her mouth, bathing her teeth in sugar for hours. There was no understanding of dental hygiene, no brushing, no flossing, no regular cleaning. The best care available was occasional rinsing with wine or rose water, which contained sugar and actually accelerated decay. Elizabeth's teeth began turning brown in her 30s, darkening to deep amber, and then black as decay progressed. Contemporary accounts describe how her teeth would sometimes crumble when she bit down, leaving fragments of blackened enamel on her lips. The pain was excruciating. She would sometimes be unable to eat solid food for days, surviving on broths and liquid medicines. Court records show her holding her hand to her jaw during public appearances, a gesture courtiers learned to recognize as a sign of dental agony. Dr. John D. prescribed horrifying remedies, rinsing with urine, crushed pearls mixed with wine and pressing hot iron against her jaw to burn out corruption. By her 50s, Elizabeth had lost several teeth entirely, and the remaining ones were loose in their sockets. The Queen's breath became legendary. Courtiers described it as the scent of a charnel house and worse than the smell of a battlefield after 3 days in the sun. In 1590 AD, the Venetian ambassador wrote, "The Queen's teeth are so black and rotten that it is a wonder she can speak at all. The smell from her mouth forced me to breathe through my mouth during our entire audience, the wig horror show." Elizabeth's famous red hair was largely fiction after her 30s, hidden beneath wigs that became their own source of hygiene nightmares. The Queen's hair loss was caused by lead-based cosmetics she used for her white complexion, but also by various treatments she applied, trying to restore her natural locks. The hair for these wigs came from peasant women who sold their hair to support families. It was often dirty and lice-infested when purchased, and cleaning methods were rudimentary. The wigs were sewn onto silk or linen bases using animal sinew threads, fitted with metal pins and combs that would rust from sweat exposure. Elizabeth's scalp condition made everything worse. Lead poisoning had left her scalp covered in weeping sores and lesions. Constant wig wearing prevented proper healing, creating cycles of infection and irritation that persisted throughout her life. The wigs were never washed, only brushed and dusted with powders. They accumulated months of sweat, oil, and atmospheric pollution. The combination of unwashed hair, decomposing organic matter, and various perfumes created a unique odor that courtiers learned to recognize as the Queen's approaching presence. Lice thrived in the warm, moist environment beneath the hairpieces. Ladies in waiting would spend hours daily picking lice from the wigs, but parasites always returned within days. The smell was so powerful it would linger in rooms long after Elizabeth left, requiring incense or open windows to clear the air. The Queen's vanity about her hair matched her denial about its condition. She would boast about her beautiful red locks, apparently unaware everyone knew she wore wigs. Foreign ambassadors wrote detailed descriptions of her hairpieces, often with barely concealed amusement. The lead paint poisoned prison. Elizabeth's signature white face was achieved through daily applications of ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar that was slowly killing her. This toxic concoction was applied every morning with animal hairbrushes, building up in layers that would crack and flake like old plaster. The lead came from Cornish mines where workers regularly died from exposure. Ground into fine powder, it would float in the air like dust, coating everything in Elizabeth's chambers. The vinegar, made from soured wine, added an acidic bite to the already caustic blend, eating away at her skin while trapping poison against her flesh. The application process was torture. The mixture burned as it was applied, causing her eyes to water and skin to redden. Elizabeth had to remain motionless for up to an hour while it dried, unable to speak, eat, or drink. As Cyrus dried, it formed a beautiful but hideous mask. The white surface appeared perfectly smooth and pale, but beneath, her natural skin was being systematically destroyed. The mask would crack throughout the day, requiring constant touch-ups and vigilant mirror checking. Elizabeth never fully removed her makeup, instead applying new layers over old ones, creating a buildup several layers thick. When she did attempt removal, hardened Cyrus had to be scraped off with ivory combs, often taking skin and leaving bloody scratches that would be covered with fresh poison the next morning. The lead poisoning affected her entire body. She suffered chronic fatigue, memory problems, and mood swings. Her hair fell out in clumps. Teeth became loose and discolored, and her breath took on a metallic taste she tried masking with sweet wines. Beneath the white mask, Elizabeth's natural skin was a horror show of sores, scars, and discoloration that grew worse yearly. The queen's lips were painted with cochineal crushed beetles mixed with oils that would go rancid in heat, developing putrid smells that mixed with her breath. The clothing catastrophe. Elizabeth's magnificent gowns were never washed, never cleaned, never allowed to rest. These garments, worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, Bombayes, became repositories of months or years of accumulated filth that no perfume could mask. The queen owned over 3,000 gowns made from finest silks, velvets, and brocades, adorned with pearls and precious stones. But their construction made cleaning impossible. Multiple fabric layers, delicate embroidery, and precious stones couldn't withstand harsh soaps. Instead, gowns were cleaned by airing, brushing, and re-perfuming. Elizabeth would wear each gown for days or weeks, allowing body odor, sweat, and bodily fluids to penetrate deep into the fabric. Rich materials absorbed these substances like sponges, creating permanent records of her bodily functions. The shift. The dressing process took hours and required numerous servants. First came the shift, a linen undergarment rarely washed, becoming yellowed and stiff with accumulated sweat. Over this went a whalebone and steel corset laced so tightly it restricted breathing and digestion. Never washed, and becoming a breeding ground for bacteria. Elizabeth's gowns were susceptible to staining because of their light colors. White, silver, and pale gold showed every mark. A single wine drop would be visible across a room. The weight sometimes exceeded 50 palmados when fully jeweled, creating a greenhouse effect that trapped heat and moisture, causing profuse sweating absorbed by the innermost fabric layers. Her stockings, boissé, made of silk or fine wool, were rarely washed and would develop holes revealing yellowed, dirt-embedded toenails. Shoes became repositories of foot odor and fungal infections, with leather becoming warped and stained. Interiors developing permanent smells, noticeable even when unworn. Elizabeth's attachment to certain gowns was so strong she'd refuse to change for days, claiming they were favorites or brought good luck. This made filth accumulation worse, with garments worn for extended periods without any cleaning attempts. The digestive nightmare. Elizabeth's digestive system was a source of constant embarrassment, creating hygiene problems beyond simple bad breath. Her rich diet, medications, and chronic ruling stress created perfect storms of digestive dysfunction throughout her life. The queen's elaborate meals lasted hours and included dozens of dishes, roasted meats, rich sauces, sugary desserts, wines, and ales. Food was heavily spiced to mask spoilage taste, and cooking methods did little to kill bacteria thriving in pre-refrigeration eras. Elizabeth's favorites were particularly problematic rich, fatty meats like roasted swan and venison, difficult to digest and causing severe stomach upset. She consumed large sugar quantities in various forms, disrupting her body's natural balance and contributing to dental problems. Her eating habits were as problematic as food choices. She'd eat quickly without proper chewing, wolfing down food between court ceremonies and diplomatic meetings. This hasty eating contributed to digestive problems and choking emergencies. The gas problems began almost immediately after eating severe bloating and gas that was both uncomfortable and embarrassing. In an era when bodily functions were shameful, especially for women, Elizabeth's digestive issues caused constant anxiety and humiliation. Tight-fitting corsets and multiple fabric layers made digestion worse, pressuring stomach and intestines and causing severe pain. Elizabeth would sometimes loosen stays during meals, highly improper and carefully concealed from public view. The gas was legendary among courtiers, who politely ignored sounds and smells from the royal person. Elizabeth would sometimes excuse herself from public events when problems became too severe, claiming illness when the real issue was far more embarrassing. Her digestive problems were worsened by medications. Mercury, prescribed for possible syphilis, was a powerful laxative causing severe diarrhea and cramping. Herbal remedies contained toxic ingredients causing nausea, vomiting, and other unpleasant symptoms. The oral hygiene catastrophe. Beyond rotting teeth, Elizabeth's entire mouth was a festering wound, creating problems far beyond bad breath. Her oral cavity had become a breeding ground for bacteria and infection, creating smells and tastes that permeated every aspect of daily life. The Queen's tongue was often coated with a thick, yellowish film, giving her breath additional putrid odor layers. This coating, caused by accumulated bacteria, dead cells, and food particles, was never properly cleaned. Lack of oral hygiene meant this coating built up over days and weeks, creating permanent tastes Elizabeth described as bitter as wormwood. Her gums were swollen and bleeding, considered normal for her age and status. Constant bleeding mixed with saliva, creating a metallic taste she tried masking with sweet wines and candied fruits. Blood also stained teeth and tongue, adding to the oral cavity horror. Elizabeth's saliva production was affected by medications and health problems. She'd sometimes produce excessive, thick, ropey saliva, collecting in mouth corners and creating visible strands when speaking. Other times, her mouth would be uncomfortably dry, causing her tongue to stick to the mouth roof and making speech difficult. Sugar consumption had created ideal bacterial growth environments. Sugar-fed bacteria living on teeth and gums, causing multiplication and acid production that further damaged oral tissues. The cycle was self-perpetuating, more sugar consumed to mask decay. Taste made oral health worse. Elizabeth's throat was chronically inflamed from constant mouth infection. She'd complain of sore throat and swallowing difficulty. Symptoms attributed to various illnesses, but likely caused by bacteria streaming down from her rotting mouth. Her attempts to mask oral problems were desperate, chewing herbs like mint and rosemary, but these were quickly overwhelmed by underlying rot. She experimented with mouth rinses made from wine, vinegar, and honey, but sugary solutions fed bacteria and worsened problems. The perfume paradox. Elizabeth's answer to overwhelming hygiene problems was dousing herself in increasingly heavy perfumes and scented oils. But this created worse problems, perfumes designed to mask natural odor, instead combined with them, creating unique and overwhelming stenches somehow worse than original smells. Her favorite perfume was civet musk, extracted from African civet cat anal glands. This musky animal scent was luxury's height, but when combined with months of accumulated body odor, created smells courtiers described as like a rose garden built over a cesspit. Daily perfume application took almost as long as makeup application. Servants dabbed various scents onto pulse points using soft brushes or fingers, sprinkling perfumed powders into clothing and hair, creating scented dust clouds settling on everything. But 16th century perfumes were crude, made from animal products and plant extracts that went rancid in heat. Oils would turn sour, developing putrid smells, mixing with Elizabeth's body odor to create something truly nauseating. Fresh and rancid perfume combinations created scents both sweet and revolting, like flowers rotting in stagnant water. Elizabeth's clothing became saturated with competing perfumes, creating portable scent clouds following her everywhere. Different fragrances reacted with each other and her body chemistry, creating new, often unpleasant odors bearing no resemblance to original components. Body heat caused perfumes to intensify and change throughout days. Pleasant morning scents became cloying and overwhelming by midday, positively nauseating by evening. Elizabeth seemed unaware of this transformation, continuing fresh perfume applications throughout days without realizing she was worsening problems. The perfume collection. The Queen's perfume collection was vast and expensive, imported from across Europe and the Middle East. She owned fragrances from rare flowers, exotic spices, and precious resins, each costing more than most annual earnings. But no money could buy perfume successfully masking months of unclean body smells. The foot horror show. Elizabeth's feet were perhaps the most neglected part of her body, hidden away in silk stockings and elaborate shoes, but suffering from conditions that would have shocked even the most hardened physician. The Queen's feet had become a source of constant pain and embarrassment, affected by fungal infections, ingrown toenails, and various ailments made worse by her poor hygiene habits. The process of caring for Elizabeth's feet was a daily ordeal none of her servants welcomed. Her stockings, made from finest silk and wool, would be peeled away to reveal feet bearing little resemblance to delicate appendages described in courtly poetry. The skin was often white and waterlogged from constant moisture, with fungal infection patches creating a cheesy, rancid odor. Elizabeth's toenails had grown long and thick, becoming yellowed and brittle from constant moisture and lack of proper care. The nails would often curl under, creating painful pressure against toes and sometimes growing into skin. The Queen's attempts to trim her toenails were crude and often resulted in cuts and infections taking weeks to heal. The spaces between Elizabeth's toes were breeding grounds for fungal infections thriving in warm, moist shoe environments. Skin would become white and peeling, infections spreading to toenails, causing them to become thick and discolored. The smell emanating from these infections was distinctive and overwhelming, described by ladies-in-waiting as like rotting cheese mixed with vinegar. Rancid odor. The Queen's shoes were works of art that had become repositories of foot odor and bacterial growth. Made from finest leather and decorated with jewels and embroidery, these shoes were never cleaned or aired out, instead accumulating months of sweat, dead skin, and various fluids seeping from Elizabeth's infected feet. Leather would become stained and warped, interiors developing permanent smells noticeable even when shoes weren't being worn. Elizabeth's habit of wearing the same shoes for days or weeks made foot problems worse. Constant moisture from sweat and lack of air circulation created ideal conditions for bacterial and fungal growth. The Queen would sometimes complain of burning and itching sensations in her feet, symptoms she attributed to various causes, but were likely related to infections plaguing her lower extremities. The Queen's foot odor was so distinctive that servants could sometimes tell when she was approaching by smell alone. The odor would linger in rooms long after she'd left, requiring open windows and burning incense to clear the air. Foreign ambassadors would sometimes comment on strange smells, seeming to emanate from the floor around the Queen's throne, not realizing they were detecting odor from her feet. The sleeping chamber. Horror Elizabeth's bedchamber was a concentrated repository of all hygiene failures, a room where months of accumulated filth created barely breathable atmospheres. The Queen's sleeping quarters, which should have been sanctuaries of rest and privacy, had become odor nightmares and unsanitary conditions challenging the strongest constitutions. The royal bed was a craftsmanship masterpiece and a neglect monument. The elaborate four-poster structure was finest carved oak, decorated with cloth of gold hangings costing more than most castles. But bed linens, changed perhaps monthly if fortunate, had become stiff with accumulated sweat, bodily fluids, and various ointments and powders applied to skin. Sheets, made from finest imported linen, soft as silk when new, had transformed into canvas-like material, yellowed and stained with bodily fluids soaked deep into fibers. Stains created maps of Elizabeth's nocturnal activities, dark patches where she'd sweated through difficult nights, yellowish areas where her bladder failed, reddish spots where sores and lesions wept and bled. The mattress, stuffed with down and feathers supposed to provide comfort, had become insect and bacteria breeding grounds. Feathers absorbed moisture and odor, creating permanent smells no airing could eliminate. The mattress, never cleaned or replaced, accumulated years of bodily fluids penetrating deep into its core. Elizabeth's nightgown was fine linen and lace that had become a second skin of accumulated filth. She'd wear the same nightgown for weeks, changing only when it became so stiff with dried bodily fluids. It was uncomfortable when the garment would yellow and stiffen, developing permanent stains marking her sleeping habits patterns. The sleeping chamber was kept tightly closed during winter to conserve heat, trapping all odor inside and creating thick, oppressive atmospheres. Air became heavy with unwashed body smells, chamber pots, stale perfume, and various medications surrounding the royal bed. Servants entering first thing morning would often gag or hold breath, struggling not to vomit from overwhelming stenches. As Elizabeth entered her life's final decade, hygiene problems reached horror crescendos that would have been unimaginable even by her earlier years' standards. Accumulated effects of decades of poor hygiene, lead poisoning, and untreated medical conditions had transformed the once glorious queen into a living embodiment of decay and neglect. The queen's skin. The queen's skin had become patchworks of sores, scars, and discoloration no makeup could conceal. Years of lead poisoning left her face pitted and scarred, with deep lesions weeping and crusting before being covered with fresh toxic cosmetic layers. Her natural skin color became sickly yellow-green, resulting from liver damage and internal problems caused by medications and poor diet. Elizabeth's hair loss became complete, leaving her scalp a battlefield of infected sores and scarred tissue. Wigs became heavier and more elaborate as she tried compensating for baldness, but constant pressure and weight only worsened scalp problems. She'd sometimes be seen scratching frantically at her head during public appearances, drawing blood and creating new wounds, taking weeks to heal. Her remaining teeth were so loose she could barely chew solid food. Diet was reduced to broths, soft breads, and liquid medicines. But even simple food sometimes caused pain. Constant mouth infection had spread to throat and sinuses, causing chronic inflammation, making speaking and breathing difficult. The smell of death. Elizabeth's body odor reached almost supernatural intensity levels. Combinations of unwashed skin, infected wounds, rotting teeth, and rancid perfumes created smells courtiers described as the scent of death itself. Her presence could be detected from rooms away, and servants would sometimes flee when hearing she was approaching. The queen's mental state had deteriorated, possibly from lead poisoning and accumulated toxins. She'd sometimes forget recent conversations, repeat herself endlessly, or fly into violent rages over minor perceived slights. Her behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable, making daily routine management difficult for courtiers. When Elizabeth Tudor died on March 24, 1603 AD at Richmond Palace, there was profound silence in the death chamber. The woman who had dominated English politics for nearly half a century was gone, and with her died the elaborate fictions that had hidden her hygiene disasters from public view. The aftermath revealed the full extent of problems concealed during her lifetime. Servants preparing her body for burial found a woman bearing little resemblance to the portraits that had made her famous. Rooms where she'd lived and died retained a distinctive odor for months after her passing, with some palace areas sealed off and abandoned, too contaminated for other purposes. You are standing once again in Greenwich Palace shadows, but now the summer morning air carries only rose scents from carefully tended gardens. The horror has been sanitized, truth polished until it gleams like the golden facades that once hid such revolting reality. But if you listen carefully to the wind through ancient stones, you might still hear whispered testimonies of long-dead servants, gasps of shocked ambassadors, and the labored breathing of a queen, who learned too late that some crowns are heavier than others, and some victories cost more than defeat. Elizabeth Tudor's greatest enemy was not Spain or France. It was the mirror reflecting back the price of denying basic mortal flesh needs. The woman who claimed marriage to England died wedded only to her own decay. And the realm she left behind was forced to air out palaces and start fresh, hoping a new king's reign would smell sweeter than the last queen's 45 long, putrid years. Don't miss out on more fascinating historical revelations. Join our community of history enthusiasts by subscribing to Historical Mysteries and hitting the notification bell so you're always among the first to uncover the past's most astonishing secrets. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.